Good day to you. Hope you're having a wonderful day. We've been reading in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, last time we read Deuteronomy chapter 23, we talked about persons being excluded from the assembly for various different reasons. And now we're ready to read Deuteronomy chapter 24. This is going to be regarding the law of divorce and some other various laws. Again, not a very long chapter, and I'll try not to make it quite so long. I think last time perhaps I overdid it, but I get enthused about certain things that we talk about, and I can have a tendency to go a bit long. So I'll try to rein that in somewhat. Okay. All right. So I am reading in the Amplified Bible. Again, this is Deuteronomy chapter 24. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she loses his favor because he has found something indecent or unacceptable about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house, and after she leaves his house, she goes and becomes another man's wife, and if the latter husband turns against her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as his wife, then her former husband who first sent her away may not take her again as his wife, since she has been defiled. For that is an outrage before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance. When a man takes a new wife, he shall not go out to fight with the army, nor be charged with any duty. He shall be free at home for 1 year, and shall bring happiness to his wife whom he has taken. So there's a little bit to unpack here. I won't go too in depth into it. I've mentioned this before in other sessions. Notice that in that first verse, that he has found something indecent or unacceptable about her. Now, this implies that she has broken the law. She has done something incorrect or wrong. Now, it doesn't appear that she necessarily has committed adultery, okay? But it's not just a willy-nilly thing where he can just say, oh, I've decided I'm tired of you and I want to get rid of you. No, she loses favor because of something indecent and unacceptable. Now, and that unacceptable is not supposed to be just his personal, oh, you've gained a few pounds, I don't want you anymore. It's not supposed to be that type of unacceptable. Now, that is how, however, that is how they ended up doing that and legalizing that in Jesus' day, and that was something that he fussed at them over. They were really only supposed to use this divorce as absolutely necessary, and it was really given to them due to the hardness of their hearts, is what Jesus said, and I will not argue with Jesus over that. So it's not supposed to be something that's just willy-nilly done. Just, oh, like I said, you've gained 5 pounds, or, oh, you're looking a few years older. Well, don't we all look at me. We all look a few years older, right? So it wasn't supposed to be like that, but that is the way they ended up translating that, or not translating that. They ended up legalizing that in the Jewish society of Jesus' day, so that basically a man could have a divorce anytime he wanted. And that was really not what was intended, and that was incorrect. Notice the honeymoon phase in verse 5. God allows for the honeymoon phase. It's like, hey, when you take a wife, you shall not go out to fight or be charged with any duty. You shall have a year at home to bring happiness to his wife, to spend time with his wife, right? I think that's a great idea, and that would be very helpful. We should always, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say that we should always try to make sure we're making time for our spouse, to make sure that we have time to bring some happiness to them and stay connected to them. I think the biggest reason we have divorce is that people tend to pull away from each other and get separated from each other due to various hurts and offenses. Even if the offense is imagined, it doesn't really matter. If you're hurt or you get some bitterness towards your spouse, it's hard to overcome some of those things. We should take time. We should make sure that we always take time for our spouse as much as we can to spend time with them, to let them know we're interested in them. It's a big deal. Pay attention to your spouse and try to do things for them, not for you for them, but for them. Actually, unselfish things, right? And that can be difficult too, especially because some of us are so busy. We're all working hard, and we get home and we're all just like, oh, let me rest, but we've got to put the focus on our spouse and put them first as much as we can. All right, I'm going to continue on. No one shall take a hand mill or an upper millstone used to grind grain into bread as security for a debt, for he would be taking a person's life in pledge. Now, this makes perfect sense. What you're doing is you're taking their ability to even pay you back. You're taking their job away. Let's say let's say the miller, the person who has the grindstone, and they're milling and grinding the grain for everyone, and they borrow money from you, and you take their grindstone away. Well, how are they going to pay you back? You've taken away their money, their ability to make money, right? You've taken away their livelihood, and that's what it means. You're taking that person's life in pledge, and that's not going to be helpful. That would be like today. Let's just think of someone who works like with tools and things, or maybe they have to have their car for their job. They have to be able to travel, and you take that away from them, and then you tell them, go make more money and pay me back. And of course, you're taking away their livelihood. Like a mechanic without his tools, he would not be able to make a living, right? All kinds of things like that. And so the idea here is not to take those types of things as security. I'm really not sure we need to take much for security anyway, but nonetheless, that would be wrong, because there you're ensuring that they will never pay you back. And so you're causing them a lot more trouble. If a man is caught kidnapping any of his countrymen from the sons of Israel, and he treats him violently or sells him as a slave, then that thief shall die. So you shall remove the evil from among you. Okay, I want you to realize we can relate this to today. This is human trafficking. That's what we're talking about. If a man is caught kidnapping any of his countrymen from the sons of Israel and sells him as a slave or treats him violently, that's human trafficking. God is against human trafficking, right? People wonder sometimes, they say, well, how can God allow evil to exist? It's not God, it's us. It's the choices we're making. He did not make us robots. And so all these things exist and happen because we reject God and we reject His wisdom and His law. Be careful during an outbreak of leprosy that you diligently observe and do according to all that the Levitical priests teach you, just as I have commanded them, so you shall be careful to do. Remember with thoughtful concern what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the road as you came out of Egypt. Now, here, God is telling them to be very careful about these, what they called leprosy. Sometimes it wasn't just leprosy, it was other skin diseases and problems of that sort, but they were, what's the word for that, where they were catchy? I can't think of the right word. Virulent? Anyway, they were things that could easily spread through the people, through the congregation. Again, God is looking out for them and saying, pay attention to these, make sure you do these things, keep yourselves. Now, this is not in a sanctified, holy way, but this is more of a sanitary way. Keep yourselves sanitary and clean and follow these guidelines that I've given you for your health and safety. And then he says, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the road. Remember how Miriam, due to the fact that she came against Moses, actually her and Aaron both did, but I think it seemed to be that she was the initial antagonist there. That's the way it seemed. So she got the punishment of having leprosy for, I think, about a week, right? When you lend your neighbor anything, you shall not go into his house to get his pledge or security deposit. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you lend shall bring the pledge out to you. If the man is poor, you shall not keep his pledge overnight. You shall certainly restore the pledge, security deposit, to him at sunset, so that he may sleep in his garment and bless you, and it will be credited to you as righteousness, right standing before the Lord your God. Now, I want us to understand in this pledge, I think some translations of this pledge would be like an outer garment or a coat, because sometimes if a person was poor, all they may have is like their clothes on their back, right? So this overcoat, or let's see, you have a tunic and a cloak. So maybe it's a cloak. That might be all they have. So God is saying you do not keep that overnight and make him sleep in the cold. Without that, you shall at least give him that back. Because the man is poor, right? And also there's this idea that just because you lend something to your neighbor, whether it be money or whatever, and he offers you something as a security deposit or a pledge, that doesn't give you the right to just violate his house or violate his life in some weird way. So God is saying, don't be that way. Still be respectful, still be kind and nice. I don't know about you, but I have had times. I had one time in my life, at least, probably more than one, but I remember one time for sure. I got gas at the gas station. I was a regular customer there, but I go in to pay, and like a doofus, I did not have my money with me for some reason. Now, I don't remember the exact reason. So what I did was I gave them my driver's license, because I only live like 5-10 minutes away. I said, I'll be right back and I will pay you. I've just messed up. I'm just a doofus, I was like, hey, it was just a mistake. And so that was kind of like my pledge. Now, you could abuse that in some way when you've got somebody over a barrel, and God is just saying, don't take advantage or abuse them in those situations, right? So again, we should be kind and thoughtful to our neighbor. You shall not take advantage of a hired servant who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your countrymen or one of the strangers, resident aliens or foreigners, who is in your land inside your cities. You shall give him his wages on the day that he earns them before the sun sets, for he is poor and is counting on it, so that he does not cry out to the Lord against you and it becomes a sin for you. Now, this is just common sense, and it makes perfect sense. So many of us today even live off our wages, and we need our wages, right? We can't afford to, let's say you get paid every 2 weeks. Well, you can't afford. You're expecting that money. You've budgeted your life around this money, right? And I'm talking about poorer people, I know, because I know there are richer people who this is not a concern for. But for poorer people, it is a concern, and I've been there. I know. So you've budgeted, and you need that money. If my company that I'm working for suddenly decides to skip paying me for an extra week or two, that could put me in a real tailspin. That could hurt my finances really bad, especially when I was younger. That would probably have wrecked me. I mean, just being honest. As you get older, you tend to actually do a little better for yourself. But in your early years, when you're just barely making it and just barely getting through, that can put you in a real tailspin. So God is saying, that's not right. Make sure that you're paying your people properly and that you do not withhold someone's wages from them. The fathers shall not be put to death for the sins of their children, nor shall the children be put to death for their fathers. Only for his own sin shall anyone be put to death. And this goes along with other verses we've read in the Bible where children are not held responsible for the sins of the parent. The parent is not held responsible for the sins of the children. That's a pretty standard thing. I think most of us understand that. You shall not pervert the justice due a stranger or an orphan, nor seize, impound a widow's garment as security for a loan. But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore, I am commanding you to do this thing. Again, this has to do with justice and integrity. We should not pervert justice for a stranger or an orphan. Instead, we should still be fair and just and have that integrity. We should not seize. Now, here we go. This kind of goes back to the pledge thing. We should not seize a widow's garment as security for a loan. I mean, let's be fair. She's a widow. And in those days, nowadays, it's always bad to be a widow or a widower because you miss your spouse. But in those days, to lose your spouse, to be a widow, was a lot harder. It was difficult for women to really own anything or to take care of themselves. And it depends on the different communities or societies you lived in. But it was much harder for a woman, especially back thousands of years ago. It just was. And so God is trying to look out for them and say, look, do not treat the widows this way. And he reminds them, you shall remember you were a slave in Egypt. Remember where you come from. Be kind to these people. Because when we realize the hardships we've gone through, that should help us have a heart for and be able to commiserate or empathize with others. So we need to remember that we ourselves are sinners, have had hard times in life. We've had times where maybe we were broke and busted, and sometimes things happened due to no fault of our own. We need to remember those things and have empathy and sympathy and kindness towards others, remembering that we've had similar issues. When you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf of grain in the field, you shall not go back to get it. It shall be for the stranger, for the orphan, and for the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives off of your olive tree, do not search through the branches again. Whatever is left shall be for the stranger, for the orphan, and for the widow. Again, God is making that allowance for the needy, the poor, the stranger. And the stranger, when they say the stranger, that's someone who's like not an Israelite, that maybe is still living in their land, or maybe even traveling and passing through their land. But nonetheless, God is making that allowance for that. Even here back in the Old Law, some people say in the New Testament, we're not supposed to be helping people who are not a part of God's family, but that was never the case. That was never true. God has always made these allowances, and that we should always be thoughtful and helpful to the needy, whether they are a part of our family, God's family, or not. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, for the orphan, and for the widow. You shall thoughtfully remember the fact that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I am commanding you to do this thing. Again, making that allowance for others, empathizing, sympathizing with others. God is reminding them of this. And this all goes back really to loving your neighbor, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, which God also commanded in the Old Law. So we want to remember these things, and that these things didn't just start with Jesus. Jesus pointed us more to these things again, and he really tried to emphasize a lot of these things. But it started back in the Old Law. It didn't just start with Jesus. So sometimes we have that wrong impression. As a kid, that is the way people seem to talk about it and teach it was like the old law was very stern and harsh and unforgiving, and there was no sympathy or empathy for anyone and until Jesus came. And that's not exactly true. That's not what we see, right? The more I'm reading this, and I admit the law is some of the harder books to read, and I have not read them as much. I think maybe I've read them once or twice in my life, but I haven't read them as much as the other books because, let's face it, reading the other books is more interesting overall, right? I'm not trying to be mean. I mean, I'm just being honest. The books of the law can be harder to read, especially when you look at Deuteronomy and Leviticus. So I really wanted to make sure we went through these, though, to recognize and see these are the things that Jesus was teaching, right? A lot of these things are. He was teaching from the law, and he didn't throw the old law away. He built upon it, and he taught from it, and really got us to focus in on the right parts of the law like this, making sure that we're treating each other with integrity and justice and with kindness and love and mercy. So this has been Deuteronomy chapter 24. I want to thank you for listening. Hope you have a wonderful day. May God bless you and keep you safe. And remember, God loves you.